Once upon a time, there was a little girl called Naivichi who lived in a big city, a very big city. But even though the city was very big, it was made up of thousands of neighborhoods that felt like little villages to the people who lived in them. These little city villages were made up of the people who lived on both sides of the street. Sometimes the village was 2 blocks long. Sometimes it was 1 block long. Sometimes it was only half a block long. It was different for each little village. But in every case, all the people in the village knew each other. In Naivichi's village, everyone knew almost everything about each other. They knew who had a big family. They knew who was sick. They knew who had a car and would take you to the grocery store. They knew who had to leave the village for work every day, and they knew all the children and whose children they were. But really, all the children were everybody's children, and every child was the responsibility of everybody, parent or not, brother or sister or not. The interesting thing about the people in Naivichi city village is that none of them had lived there very long. All the parents had come from someplace else. They had come from different parts of the country or from outside the country. The grown-ups were all immigrants from island countries or refugees from other states or just people who had moved from nearby hoping for a better life in the village. Actually, that's what everyone there was hoping for, no matter where they came from, a better life. There's another thing that everyone in Naivichi's village had in common, and that was brown skin. They all had brown skin in a variety of warm shades that got richer in the summer sun and paler in the winter, but it was always brown. Naivichi's father said that whenever someone who had skin that color wanted to buy a house, they could only buy it through one company, and they could only buy a house in that village, no place else. That was why the people in the village all looked similar, even though they were from different places. That made Naivichi curious about her neighbors, and she started asking her friends about where their families had come from. Sometimes her questions made her friends go home and ask their parents her questions, and sometimes their parents would agree to talk to Naivichi themselves. And that's why I need to tell you something about the houses in Naivichi City Village. The house Naivichi lived in was attached to others on either side, as if the houses were really good friends. All of them had small fenced-in yards in the back, and even smaller fenced-in yards in front next to the sidewalk. The sidewalk was mostly where the village children played. It was made of sheets of slate, a smooth rock, perfect for roller skates. It was also good for hopscotch, because you could draw on it with chalk to make the boxes. And it was perfect for jacks, because it was smooth and hard, and the ball would bounce high and give you enough time to scoop up the jacks. But the most special thing about the houses in Naivichi City Village was the stoops. All the houses had outside stairs perfect for sitting on. They were great for chatting, or stoop ball, or paper dolls, or reading, or board games, or counting all the blue cars passing, or for just watching the neighbors go by. And they were especially good for the stories Naivichi was hearing about the places her friends' families were from. Naivichi learned something from her friends that she thought was really fascinating. She discovered that almost all of them, no matter where they were from, had Native American ancestors, or living Native relatives, or family on a nearby Indian reservation. and they were all from different native nations. So the next time Naivichi and her mother were sitting on the stoop, Naivichi said, "I've learned that almost all my friends have Native American relatives. What about us?" Her mother smiled. "We are Shoshone," she said. "The Shoshone people are native to this land. We are some of the people who used to live in teepees in the old days, although some native people lived in other kinds of houses. We call you Naivichi because it means little girl in Shoshone." Naivichi sat up straight in surprise. "I didn't know that," she said. "I knew it was my nickname, but I didn't know what it meant." She was thoughtful for a minute, then asked, "Many of my friends have stories they share with me. Do you have stories?" Her mother laughed. "I've been telling you stories. I guess I just didn't tell you they were Shoshone stories. Remember the one about how Coyote stole fire?" "Yes." Naivichi bounced on her step. "I like that one, but please tell it again." "Okay," said her mother. "Here it is. How fire was stolen. A long, long time ago, the animals were people. They talked like people, and they acted like people, and sometimes they looked like regular people who acted like the animals they really were. But also sometimes they had heads like animals and bodies like people, which could be confusing. One day, Coyote was lying in the sun. All of a sudden, he saw something small, and then many, many small somethings floating down from the sky. The little black and gray bits came out of the south on the wind and fell to the ground. The other animals saw them too and came over to see if they could figure out what they were and where they had come from. Hummingbird said, "I'll fly up and see what I can find out." Everybody watched him go. Coyote said, "I can see him way up there. He's just sitting up there looking around," because, as you know, hummingbirds can hover in one spot in the air for a while without moving in any particular direction. Then everybody realized that Hummingbird was looking to all the 4 directions, east, south, west, and north, and everywhere in between, to see where the specks had come from. All of a sudden, Coyote noticed that he was looking in just one specific direction. Coyote said, "Now he's looking off to the south, and he saw something." At last, Hummingbird flew down, and everyone gathered around him. Hummingbird announced, "All those little specks in the air are ashes from a fire. There is a very big fire to the south." Everyone got really excited, because up until then they didn't have any fire. All the animals and people in that place ate their food raw, because there was no way to cook it. And in the winter, they were always cold, because there was no way to keep warm unless they all huddled together. Someone said, "Let's go get some fire." So almost all of them jumped up and started to head south towards the fire. Coyote had an idea and asked different animals to post themselves at various points along the way. The rest of the animals went on and on until finally they could see the flames. The people in that new place were having a big celebration and dancing around an enormous bonfire. When they were almost at the fire, Coyote made himself a wig of false hair made from milkweed string. As he got right up to the fire, he joined the people there and started to dance with them. They did not recognize him. If they had, They would not have welcomed him because he was a trickster, always trying to fool people. Everyone danced all night. As Coyote danced, he tried to get close enough to catch the fire in his false hair. When it was nearly morning, he finally succeeded in leaning close enough, and his hair caught on fire. As soon as Coyote caught the fire in his hair, he began to run as fast as he could. The wind he made as he passed made the people's fire go out, so they ran after him to get it back. Coyote ran to the closest person he had posted, and that was Puma. Coyote passed the fire to him because he was tired after dancing all night. Puma ran as fast as he could to the next person to give him the fire, and he ran to the next, and so on, and that was the very first relay race. Coyote invented it. The last one in the race was Jackrabbit, who carried the fire in his tail. The fire burned his tail and turned it black, and that is why now all jackrabbits have black tails. Now Fox, who had stayed home, had a house on the top of a tall rock. He was sitting outside when Jackrabbit came running with the fire. Big, heavy hail had started falling. Balls of ice an inch thick fell, which hurt Jackrabbit and made him cry out in pain. Fox heard him and went down to see if he could help. Jackrabbit handed Fox the fire, and they both managed to escape the people chasing them to get back their fire. While Fox carried the fire, it burned him, making his fur red. The people who were chasing them called out, "We don't want you, we just want the fire back." So Fox said, "Oh, I see. That makes a difference." He threw the fire into a large pile of thin, woody sticks and scattered the sticks in all directions. Then he called for everybody to come and pick them up. Now the sticks have all the fire inside them, and anybody can have some. All you need to get the fire back out of the sticks is a bow drill, and those are easy to make. And that is how all the people got fire. That night, Naivichi dreamed about talking animals and people and bonfires. The next evening, Naivichi asked her mother for another Shoshone story. Her mother said, and thought for a minute. Then she said, "I'll tell you a story that makes me think of all the stars I could see in the night sky when I was growing up in the country. Where we live now, in the city, it's hard to see many stars. There are too many street lights and car headlights and advertising billboards and all the other artificial outdoor lights that cause what they call light pollution. This story is about what happened when a black bear and a gray grizzly got into a fight over food. It's called Sky Trail. A long, long time ago, so long ago that very few people can really remember why and how it happened, the black bear, Wakini, turned out to be stronger than the gray grizzly, Wakinu. The black bears say that it happened because Wakinu was inexcusably rude. Wakini was minding his own business, eating the food he had found in an anthill, when Wakinu just walked up and started to help himself to Wakini's meal. My goodness gracious, everybody knows that's something you simply just don't do, especially when food is hard to find. So Wakini got very angry, and he and Wakinu had a big fight. The fur was really flying that day, and Wakini won, which should have been a big surprise because he was smaller. But it wasn't a surprise that day, since he was both very hungry and extremely angry, and he was so angry because Wakinu had been so very, very rude. Everybody saw the fight. It was very noisy with all the growling, and the sound had drawn everyone's attention. And many people had seen what started it, and they had told everyone else. Wakinu was in the wrong, and everybody knew it. So, as is the custom, he had to accept whatever punishment the people decided upon. After much discussion long into the night, all the animals agreed that even though he lost the fight, Wakinu needed to be banished. He had done something unforgivable that had damaged the community at a time when there wasn't always enough food for everyone. He was selfish. He needed to leave and never, ever come back. Wakinu, who hadn't thought that far ahead, didn't expect to be banished. That was such a terrible punishment. He had thought that since he was so big and strong, he could have and do just about anything he wanted. When he finally realized that it wasn't so, he begged and he cried, saying that there was plenty of food for two in the anthill, and I was hungry too, and bigger people need more food than smaller people. But the law was clear, and the decision had been made. So he had to leave his family and everything that he loved and all that was familiar to him. He had to suffer the consequences of what he had done because he was too greedy to find his own food. And so Wakinu walked slowly and sadly away from his home and away from all that he had known. As he went, he was still crying, so his tears made it hard for him to see where he was going. He never realized that he had wandered into a place where you couldn't see anything but snow until he fell into a deep snowdrift that was way over his head. Wakinu struggled and struggled for a long time to get back out of the snowdrift. When he finally did manage to climb out, he wiped both the snow and the tears from his eyes and looked all around. He saw absolutely nothing but snow. No trail, no trees, no footsteps to follow, nothing to guide him. There was only cold and wet and white whichever way he turned his head. Wakinu sighed a big, tired sigh. "Oh, well," he said, "I guess wherever I end up is where I should be." And he started off again. Because of all the snow and ice and constant wind, instead of gray, he was by now almost completely white from nose to tail, almost like a polar bear, only a little bit smaller. Wakinu just kept walking, on and on and on and on, not paying attention to anything in particular, just putting one slow foot in front of another through the driving snow and the noisy wind. After a very long time, he finally became aware that he could actually hear his footsteps. He could still hear the storm way off in the distance, but around him was no wind, no falling snow, no longer absolute bitter cold. Above him the sky was clear, and where the sky met the snow was a wide white path leading right up to the heavens. Wakinu was astonished, and, suddenly no longer exhausted, he ran excitedly towards the path and up it. He shook the snow from his fur and found to his great surprise that he was immediately much lighter. His fur was now dry and no longer weighed him down. He continued to run, fascinated by the light reflecting from the trail. Higher and higher he went, light as air and happier than he had ever been. Anyone who happened to be outside that night and looking up saw something new. High in the sky was a bright path sprinkled with the snow Wakinu had shaken from his fur, and right at the end of the path sat a large gray bear. That bear can still be seen in the sky to this day. Some people call it Ursa Major and say it's part of the Big Dipper constellation of stars. But the Shoshone people know it's Wakinu, who crossed the Bridge of Souls and arrived safely in the place of good hunting. That night, Naivichi dreamed about snow and stars. The next afternoon, as usual, Naivichi and her friends gathered on her stoop to rest after a long afternoon of play. The double Dutch ropes had been wrapped up, ready to be put away. Nobody wanted the job of untangling them next time if they were left to jumble themselves up into knots. One of her friends said, "Naivichi, you've been asking all of us about our native relatives. My tribe is having a powwow on the reservation Labor Day weekend. Why don't you come? Ask your parents." Naivichi ran inside to tell her mother about the invitation. Her mother was excited too, and suggested that they discuss it over dinner after she finished in her office for the day and after her father got home from work. During dinner, they all agreed that they wanted to go to the powwow. They would have enough time to plan, and it wasn't too far away. They talked about logistical things like arranging their schedules and how they would get there and what time it would start and how bad the traffic would be and how much time they would need to allow to get there and how late they would get home and whether they should stay overnight and what they would take and how much all of it would cost, although they wouldn't let Naivichi be concerned about that last part. Then her mother said, "But before we go, there are some things you need to know about powwows. Even though this one may be a bit different from those I went to at home, some things will be the same. First thing, a powwow is a time to gather with friends and family, to honor traditions, to remember loved ones who have become ancestors, and to offer up prayers for anyone who needs them. If you're a guest at a powwow, as each of us will be, it's important to be respectful and to ask questions if there's something you don't know. If there's nobody around to ask, listen to the person with the microphone, called the Master of Ceremonies or the MC, and watch the people around you. If they stop talking and stand up, you stop talking and stand up too. The MC will also explain the different dances and introduce the different drum groups. Second thing, powwows are built around a circle, whether it's a circle in a big open field and marked off by ropes and hay bales, or the middle of the floor space in a big gym or convention center. It's been blessed, and it's considered holy ground while the powwow is happening. People pray while they dance. That's why it's never okay to cut across the circle to get to the other side. Always go all the way around. Third thing, the garments dancers wear at powwows are called regalia, not costumes. Costumes are what you wear when you're pretending to be something you're not, like on Halloween. Regalia are worn by people who are what they say they are. Regalia are usually made by hand and are very special. Don't touch anyone's regalia without permission, and don't take any pictures without permission either. In the meantime, since the powwow is a few weeks away, we'll read some of our books and listen to our powwow music. And we'll cook as many as possible of the foods that were already here in the Americas before people from Europe brought in other foods like wheat and pork. As we already do, your dad and I will use corn and tomatoes and avocado and squash and turkey and prickly pear cactus with all the spines cut off. We'll cook quinoa, beans, peppers, and potatoes, and make some sassafras tea. And maybe I'll even make fry bread as something different, even though fry bread is a more recent native food tradition made from ingredients Europeans used. So that night, when Naivichi went to bed, she thought of herself for the first time as what her mother called an urban Indian, somebody who lived in a city and wasn't surrounded by people who all shared the same traditions and customs passed down for generations, somebody who looked on the outside like lots of other people, but who on the inside had a different background and history. Naivichi lay in bed for a while, happily looking forward to her first powwow, imagining the sound of drums and the sight of brightly dressed people dancing in a circle. Then she got up again, went to her closet, and reached up to a shelf in the back. She brought out the tiny moccasins she had been given at her naming ceremony when she was a baby. She put them on the table next to her bed, gave them a little pat, and climbed into bed again. Then Naivichi finally fell asleep.